The Florida sun cast long shadows across Harold and Denise Miller's front porch as they settled into their matching rocking chairs, iced tea condensating in tall glasses beside them. This evening ritual had become sacred in the 8 months since they'd moved from Cincinnati to their modest ranch home in Naples. The air was thick with jasmine, and the distant calls of sandhill cranes returning to the nearby wetlands. "I still can't believe we did it," Harold said, his weathered hand finding Denise's across the small table between them. 43 years of work, and here we are. Denise smiled, the fine lines around her eyes crinkling with genuine contentment. At 67, both she and Harold had stuck to their retirement plan with remarkable discipline. Their $640,000 nest egg, built through decades of careful saving at the hospital where she worked as a nurse administrator, and the manufacturing company where Harold had been operations manager, represented security and possibility. Their 3-bedroom house was fully paid off. Their health was good. Their 2 adult children were established in their own lives. "We earned this," Denise replied, squeezing his hand. "Remember how many vacations we skipped? How many times we drove that old Camry long after it should have been replaced?" This was the retirement they had envisioned during those years of sacrifice. Simple pleasures, financial security, and the freedom to visit their grandchildren without checking vacation balances. They joined the local recreation center, started taking twice-weekly walks on the beach, and Harold had even signed up for a woodworking class at the community college. The call came on a Tuesday morning in April, while Harold was tending to the small vegetable garden he'd started in the backyard. Denise was in the kitchen, prepping a marinade for chicken, when the landline rang with a Tampa area code. "Mrs. Miller, this is Michael Stevens from the Fraud Prevention Department at First Atlantic Bank. I'm calling because our systems have detected suspicious activity on your joint account with your husband. For security purposes, can you confirm the last 4 digits of your social security number?" Denise hesitated momentarily. They'd always been cautious about sharing personal information, but the caller ID showed what appeared to be their bank's customer service number, and the man's professional tone carried the gravitas of someone accustomed to handling sensitive matters. "May I ask what kind of suspicious activity?" Denise asked, wiping her hands on a kitchen towel. The caller's voice lowered with practiced concern. "Ma'am, we've detected multiple attempts to wire funds from your investment account to an overseas account in the past hour. Our system flagged it because it doesn't match your typical transaction patterns. Have you or your husband authorized any large transfers today?" "No, absolutely not," Denise said, her heart beginning to race. "We haven't touched that account since we transferred some money to our checking account last month." "That's what I suspected," the caller said grimly. "I'm afraid your account may have been compromised. We need to take immediate action to secure your assets." Denise called Harold in from the garden, her voice tight with alarm. Harold entered, still wearing his gardening gloves, soil clinging to the knees of his khaki shorts. "What's wrong?" he asked, immediately reading the concern on his wife's face. "It's the bank," Denise whispered, hand over the receiver. "Someone's trying to get into our retirement account." Harold took the phone, his expression hardening as he listened to the caller explain the situation in more detail. The man on the other end, Michael Stevens as he called himself, described a sophisticated hacking attempt that had targeted several retired clients. His voice was reassuring, yet urgent, the perfect blend of authority and concern. "Mr. Miller, we need to move quickly. These hackers are persistent, and they already have some of your information. What we need to do is move your funds to a secure, temporary account, while our cybersecurity team locks down your compromised account and creates a new one with enhanced security protocols." Harold frowned, a flicker of suspicion crossing his face. "Shouldn't we just come into the branch to handle this?" "Under normal circumstances, yes," the man replied smoothly. "But there's a reason we're handling this remotely. We believe the breach may have originated from someone with access to our internal systems. Until we identify the source, we're handling these cases through our specialized fraud team. If you came into a branch, you'd be speaking with regular staff who don't have the clearance or training to handle this level of security breach. It was a masterful touch, not only providing a reason why they couldn't simply visit their local branch, but also implying that this was an inside job requiring special handling. It simultaneously explained away the usual verification processes while elevating the caller's authority. "I understand," Harold said, though uncertainty lingered in his voice. "So, what do we need to do?" "I'm going to stay on the line while you log into your account. I need you to verify what you're seeing, and then I'll guide you through the secure transfer process." Harold went to retrieve his laptop from the study, bringing it to the kitchen table where Denise now sat rigid with worry. He opened the banking website, logged in, and confirmed that their accounts appeared normal. "Everything looks fine," Harold reported. "That's because we've frozen the suspicious transactions," the caller explained. "But the hackers still have your login credentials. They're just waiting for an opportunity. What we need to do now is transfer your funds to a secure temporary account." For the next 45 minutes, Michael Stevens guided Harold through a series of increasingly complex steps, explaining each one as a necessary security measure. He directed Harold to a website that looked identical to their bank's transfer page, but was, in fact, a sophisticated replica. When Harold hesitated at entering his password on this page, the caller assured him it was the bank's secure emergency portal. "This is a dedicated secure channel," he explained. "Notice the HTTPS in the address bar and the lock icon. That means it's encrypted." These were the very security features Harold and Denise had been taught to look for. What they couldn't know was that criminals had become adept at replicating these trust indicators. By the time they ended the call, Harold had unwittingly authorized a transfer of $215,000, roughly a third of their retirement savings, to what he believed was a secure temporary account within their bank system. In reality, the money was en route to an account that would soon disperse the funds through a complex web of transactions designed to obscure the money trail. "He'll call back tomorrow to confirm the rest of the transfers once this one processes," Harold told Denise, closing his laptop with a sigh of relief. He said they're doing it in stages to avoid triggering any automated flags in the system. That evening, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset, neither Harold nor Denise could fully relax. The incident had shaken their sense of security, but they were grateful for the bank's apparent vigilance. "I should call Lisa," Denise said, referring to their daughter who worked in healthcare administration in Chicago. "She deals with data security protocols all the time. Maybe she can explain some of what's happening." Harold shook his head. "Stevens was very clear that we shouldn't discuss this with anyone until the security team completes their investigation. They're concerned about potential leaks. We should just follow their instructions." This element of secrecy, the instruction not to tell anyone, even family, is a classic hallmark of scams. It isolates victims from those who might help them see through the deception. For Harold and Denise, it meant proceeding without the benefit of their daughter's more tech-savvy perspective. The next morning, Michael Stevens called again as promised. This time, he had alarming news. "Mr. and Mrs. Miller, I'm afraid the situation is more serious than we initially thought. Our team has discovered that this wasn't a random attack. Your accounts were specifically targeted, likely because of the substantial balance in your retirement fund." Denise gripped Harold's hand as they listened on speakerphone at the kitchen table. "The good news is that the first transfer was successful. Your funds are secure. Now we need to move the remaining balance. But given the sophisticated nature of this attack, we're going to add an extra layer of security." This time, Stevens connected them to his supervisor, a woman who identified herself as Rebecca Martinez from the bank's executive security team. Her voice carried even more authority than Stephen's, with a clipped efficiency that suggested someone accustomed to handling high-stakes situations. "Mr. and Mrs. Miller, I understand how unsettling this must be. Rest assured, we're taking every precaution to protect your life savings. What concerns me most is that the attackers seem to have extensive information about you, including your social security numbers and account history." The mention of their social security numbers sent a fresh wave of anxiety through both Harold and Denise. The woman continued, explaining that they needed to transfer the remaining funds immediately, but with enhanced verification. "This time, I'll need to stay on video call with you throughout the process," she instructed, sending them a link to what appeared to be the bank's secure video conference system. "This way, we can verify your identity visually and ensure no one is coercing you." The video call interface looked professional, with the bank's logo prominently displayed. The woman who appeared on screen matched the authoritative voice, mid-50s, smartly dressed in business attire, with reading glasses and a nameplate visible on her desk that read, "R. Martinez, Executive Security." Under her guidance, Harold transferred another $325,000 to what he believed was another secure holding account. The remaining $100,000 was in a separate IRA that required additional paperwork, which Rebecca promised to help them with the following day. "You've done everything right," she assured them as the call ended. "Your funds are now secure from the hackers. Tomorrow, we'll finalize the paperwork for the remaining amount and begin the process of setting up your new, more secure permanent accounts." That evening, Harold felt a gnawing unease. "Maybe we should check our account online just to see the status," he suggested to Denise as they prepared dinner. "They said not to log in from our usual devices," Denise reminded him. "It could compromise the security measures they've put in place." Another classic scammer tactic, preventing victims from checking their accounts through normal channels that would reveal the fraud. The third day brought yet another call, this time from a man identifying himself as Special Agent Thomas Wilson of the Financial Crimes Unit of the FBI. He explained that their bank had contacted federal authorities due to the sophisticated nature of the attack on their accounts. "Mr. and Mrs. Miller, I've been briefed on your situation by the security team at First Atlantic. I want you to know that you're doing everything right. We're tracking this criminal organization, and your cooperation is helping us build a case against them." The supposed FBI agent's involvement added an additional layer of seeming legitimacy to the scam. He explained that the final transfer of their remaining retirement funds was necessary not only for their own security, but as part of a federal sting operation. "We believe these criminals have an insider at the bank," he confided. "Your final transfer will help us trace the information leak. I can't overstate how valuable your assistance is to this investigation." By now, Harold and Denise were fully entangled in an elaborate fiction, one that played on their desire to be good citizens, their trust in institutions, and their fear of losing everything they'd worked for. Under the guidance of Agent Wilson, they completed paperwork to transfer their final $100,000 from their IRA. That night, Denise called their daughter Lisa, despite the warnings not to discuss the situation. Something about the day's interactions had finally triggered her maternal instincts, a sense that she needed her daughter's perspective. Lisa answered on the third ring, the sounds of her own family dinner audible in the background. "Mom, everything okay? You never call this late." Denise hesitated, then began carefully explaining the situation, trying to frame it as the bank and FBI working together to protect their accounts. With each detail she shared, the background noise on Lisa's end grew quieter until there was total silence. "Mom," Lisa said finally, her voice tight with controlled panic. "This isn't the bank or the FBI. You're being scammed. Don't transfer any more money. Don't talk to these people again. I'm booking a flight right now." Denise's world seemed to tilt sideways. "That's not possible," she whispered. We've been talking to them for days. They know everything about our accounts. It's a scam, Lisa repeated firmly. A sophisticated one. Hang up with me and call the real bank right now. But not from any number these people gave you. Use the number on the back of your actual bank card. Harold was in the shower when Denise made the call to their actual bank. By the time he emerged, towel around his waist, he found his wife of 45 years, sitting motionless at the kitchen table, her face ashen, the phone lying before her. "It's gone," she said, her voice hollow. "All of it. The bank has no record of any fraud investigation. No Michael Stevens, no Rebecca Martinez. The transfers went to accounts they can't trace." Harold stood frozen, water still dripping from his hair. "That's not possible," he said, unconsciously echoing his wife's earlier denial. "They were from the bank. They knew everything about us." "They weren't, and they didn't," Denise said, a single tear tracking down her cheek. "They just made us tell them everything they needed to know." The next 48 hours passed in a blur of police reports, bank security teams, actual FBI agents, and crushing, suffocating shame. Their daughter arrived from Chicago, taking charge of the situation with grim efficiency, but the prognosis was bleak. The money had been moved through multiple accounts within minutes of each transfer, eventually disappearing into cryptocurrency exchanges designed to obscure the trail. "I'm sorry," said Detective Sarah Reeves of the Naples Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit, closing her notebook after a 3-hour interview at their kitchen table. "We'll do everything we can, but I have to be honest with you. In cases like this, recovery of funds is extremely rare." She left them with pamphlets about elder fraud support groups and the contact information for a victim advocate. Lisa stayed in the guest room, making calls, filing reports, and creating a detailed timeline of the scam. Harold retreated to the garage, where he sat in silence on his workbench stool, staring at nothing. "Dad?" Lisa found him there late that night, still sitting in the same position. "You should try to get some sleep." Harold didn't look up. 43 years, he said, his voice cracking. "Every extra shift, every bonus we didn't spend, every vacation we cut short, gone because I was stupid enough to fall for a phone call." "This isn't your fault," Lisa said firmly, pulling up another stool. "These scammers are professionals. They do this all day, every day. They know exactly what to say, exactly what emotions to trigger." Harold finally looked at her, his eyes red-rimmed. "I was supposed to take care of her, to take care of us. Now what are we supposed to do? Go back to work at 70? Sell the house? Become a burden to you kids?" In the kitchen, Denise sat at the table with their actual bank statements spread before her, trying to take inventory of what remained. Their checking account had about $24,000. Their house was worth perhaps $380,000 in the current market. Social Security would provide about $4,100 a month between them. It wasn't nothing, but it wasn't the secure retirement they had planned and saved for all their lives. The next weeks brought a relentless parade of humiliations. They had to explain to friends why they were suddenly canceling plans that involved spending money. They had awkward conversations with their son Michael about why they couldn't commit to visiting his family in Seattle as planned. They fielded concerned calls from neighbors who had noticed the police car in their driveway. Most painful was the growing strain between them. Harold withdrew into himself, spending hours alone in the garage or garden, avoiding conversation. Denise found herself walking on eggshells, afraid to discuss practical matters for fear of deepening his shame, yet increasingly anxious about their future. 6 weeks after the scam, Lisa convinced them to attend a support group for victims of elder fraud at the local senior center. Harold initially refused, but relented under pressure from both his daughter and wife. The room was set up with chairs in a circle, coffee and cookies on a side table. About 15 seniors were already seated when the Millers arrived. A woman in her early 60s approached them immediately. "I'm Sandra Walters, the group facilitator," she said, shaking their hands warmly. "I'm also a victim. Lost $120,000 to a government grant scam 3 years ago. Welcome to what I call the smartest people who made the dumbest mistake club." For the first time since the scam, Harold laughed. A short, surprised sound that seemed to startle even him. "That's actually comforting," Denise admitted. "That's why we're here," Sandra replied. "To remind each other that this doesn't define us, that it could happen to anyone, and does happen to thousands of people every day." As the meeting progressed, Harold and Denise listened to stories that mirrored their own in haunting ways. A retired professor who lost money to a grandchild impersonation scam. A former bank manager who fell victim to a Medicare fraud scheme. A retired military officer whose life savings disappeared in a cryptocurrency investment scam. Each story featured intelligent, accomplished people who had been skillfully manipulated by criminals who knew exactly which emotional buttons to push. When it was their turn, Harold surprised Denise by speaking up. His voice was shaky at first, but grew stronger as he recounted their experience, sparing no detail that might help others avoid the same trap. "The worst part," he concluded, "isn't even the money. It's the shame, the feeling that I should have known better, that I failed my wife after promising to take care of her all these years." An older gentleman across the circle nodded in recognition. "I didn't leave my house for 3 months after it happened to me," he shared. "Couldn't face anybody. My wife finally dragged me to a group like this one. Saved my life, I think." After the meeting, they stayed to speak with that week's guest speaker, a cybersecurity expert named Dr. Elaine Chen from Florida Gulf Coast University, who specialized in elder fraud. "What you experienced is what we call a multi-stage social engineering attack," Dr. Chen explained as they sat together in a quiet corner. "These scammers are basically psychological warfare experts. They don't hack computers, they hack human trust." "But how did they know so much about us?" Denise asked. "They knew our account balances, our recent transactions, even the fact that we'd just moved from Ohio." Dr. Chen nodded. "Much of that information is publicly available, or can be purchased on the dark web from previous data breaches. Some of it they simply tricked you into revealing during the early stages of the conversation. They start with a few known details to establish credibility, then use your responses to gather more information, creating a feedback loop that feels authentic." "I still don't understand how we fell for it," Harold said, shaking his head. "We've always been careful. We've read about scams. We thought we were too smart for this." "Intelligence has very little to do with vulnerability to these attacks," Dr. Chen said firmly. "In fact, sometimes being intelligent can make you more vulnerable, because these scammers are experts at creating scenarios that bypass critical thinking by triggering emotional responses. Fear, urgency, authority. They create situations where your brain's alarm system overrides your analytical system." She leaned forward, her expression earnest. "The tactics they used on you, the impersonation of authority figures, the creation of artificial time pressure, the insistence on secrecy, the gradual escalation of commitment. These are the same techniques used in military psychological operations. You weren't outsmarted. You were outgunned in a type of warfare you weren't trained for." On the drive home, Harold and Denise sat in unusual silence. Finally, Denise reached across the console and took her husband's hand. "I don't blame you," she said quietly. "I was there too. I fell for it too." Harold's grip tightened on the steering wheel. "I keep thinking about what we lost. The trips to see the grandkids, the woodworking shop I was going to build, your art classes." "We haven't lost everything," Denise replied after a moment. "We have the house. We have each other. We have our health, for now at least. Many people retire with far less than what we still have. It wasn't acceptance, not yet, but it was the beginning of a conversation about moving forward rather than looking backward. 3 months after the scam, Harold and Denise had developed a new routine. They'd downsized from 2 cars to 1. They'd cancelled their premium cable package and started using the library instead of buying books. Small adjustments that wouldn't restore their lost savings, but helped them regain a sense of financial control. More significantly, they'd both found purpose in their pain. At Sandra's invitation, they began speaking at senior centers throughout Collier County, sharing their experience to help others avoid similar scams. Harold, who had always been shy about public speaking, discovered he had a talent for connecting with audiences through his painful honesty. "I was an operations manager for 30 years, he would tell the rooms full of retirees. "I prided myself on not being easily fooled. But these scammers aren't the clumsy criminals you see in movies or the obvious fake emails full of spelling errors. They're sophisticated psychological manipulators who have studied exactly how to bypass your natural defenses." Denise would then explain the specific red flags they'd missed: the insistence on urgent action, the demand for secrecy, the gradual escalation of commitment, the creation of plausible explanations for why normal verification procedures couldn't be followed. Their son Michael flew in from Seattle for a long weekend, bringing their grandchildren and a proposal. He had calculated that if they sold their Naples home and moved into his family's finished basement apartment in the Pacific Northwest, they could reinvest the home equity and stretch their remaining resources much further. Plus, they would be able to see their grandchildren grow up, something that had been central to their retirement dreams. The suggestion sparked the first serious argument between Harold and Denise since the scam. "It makes financial sense," Harold insisted after their son had gone to bed. "You know it does, and we'd see the kids all the time." "It makes financial sense because we were robbed," Denise countered, her voice tight with suppressed emotion. "But living in our son's basement was never part of our plan. I don't want our final chapter to be a constant reminder of what we lost." "What choice do we have?" Harold asked, genuinely bewildered. "We can't afford to stay here long term. Not if we want any kind of security." Denise sat down beside him on the edge of their bed. "I've been thinking about this a lot," she said carefully. "What if we sell the house, but instead of moving to Seattle, we buy a small condo here? Something with much lower maintenance costs and insurance. We could use the difference to create a small nest egg again." "And then what? Live on Social Security?" "For now," Denise nodded. "And I've been talking to Sandra about the victim advocacy work she does. There's grant funding for peer counselors who have personal experience with elder fraud. It's part-time, but it would supplement our income while letting us continue the outreach work we've started." Harold was quiet for a long moment. "You want to turn the worst mistake of our lives into a job?" "I want to turn the worst thing that happened to us into something meaningful," Denise corrected gently. "I'm not ready to move across the country and become dependent on our children. I'm not ready to give up and call this the end of our story." 6 months after the scam, Harold stood at a podium in the ballroom of the Naples Community Center, looking out at a crowd of nearly 200 seniors. Behind him sat a panel that included Detective Reeves, Dr. Chen, a representative from the FBI's Elder Fraud Division, and Denise. "My name is Harold Miller," he began, his voice steady now after dozens of similar presentations. 8 months ago, my wife and I retired after lifetimes of hard work and careful saving. We had $640,000 in retirement accounts, a paid-off home, and plans for a secure future. 3 days later, we had nothing but Social Security and crushing shame." He paused, making eye contact with audience members. Many nodded in sympathy. Others looked concerned or even skeptical, the same "it couldn't happen to me" expression he'd once worn himself. "Today, I'm not here to get your sympathy," though I appreciate it. I'm here to tell you that what happened to us could happen to any of you, regardless of your intelligence, your education, or your financial literacy. And I'm here to give you the tools to make sure it doesn't. For the next hour, the panel discussed the psychological tactics used by scammers, the red flags that often go unnoticed, and the steps seniors could take to protect themselves and each other. When it was Denise's turn to speak, she focused on the emotional aftermath. The financial loss is devastating, she acknowledged. But the damage to your self-image, your relationships, and your sense of security in the world can be even more profound. We've met victims who became suicidal, whose marriages ended, who withdrew from all social connections because of shame. She looked at Harold, reaching for his hand across the table. We came close to that edge ourselves. What saved us was connection, being honest about what happened, finding others who understood, and eventually finding purpose in helping prevent others from experiencing the same pain. After the presentation, a line formed of attendees wanting to speak with the panelists. An elderly man with a cane waited patiently for his turn with Harold. "My wife got a call just like the one you described last week," he said, when he finally reached the front of the line. "She was halfway through giving them our account information when she remembered your talk at the senior center last month. She hung up and called the real bank instead." He extended his hand. "You saved our retirement. I don't know how to thank you." Harold struggled to maintain his composure as he shook the man's hand. "You just did," he said simply. Later that evening, Harold and Denise sat on the small balcony of their new condo, watching the sunset over a different view than the one they'd enjoyed at their house. The space was smaller, the neighborhood less exclusive, but the mortgage was manageable with their reduced circumstances. "Do you ever wonder if we'll catch them?" Denise asked, sipping her tea. "The people who took our money?" Harold considered the question. "I used to think about it constantly. Imagined them being arrested, our money being returned, some kind of Hollywood ending." He shook his head. "Now I'm not sure it would change much for me even if it happened. That money, it's gone in more ways than one. It belongs to a different version of our life." Denise nodded, understanding what he meant. The money represented not just financial security, but a certain narrative about their lives, one where hard work and careful planning guaranteed a particular kind of retirement. That narrative had been shattered, and no return of funds could fully restore it. "I think about that man today," Harold continued. "The one whose wife remembered our talk. There's something, I don't know, healing about that. Like maybe this whole nightmare might save 100 other people from the same fate." "It doesn't erase what happened," Denise said quietly. "No," Harold agreed. "But it gives it meaning. And maybe that's the best we can do with the worst things that happen to us. Find some way to make them mean something beyond just pain." They sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned from orange to deep purple. Their life wasn't what they had planned. The careful calculations of their working years had been rendered irrelevant in 3 days of manipulation by faceless criminals they would likely never meet. Yet here they were, still together, still finding moments of peace. Inside, their phone rang. Harold rose to answer it, returning moments later with a smile. "That was Sandra. The State Attorney General's office wants us to be part of a task force on elder fraud prevention. They're putting together public service announcements, training for bank employees, the works." Denise raised her eyebrows. "Paid?" "A stipend," Harold confirmed. "Not much, but something. And they'll cover travel expenses for speaking engagements throughout the state." Denise reached for his hand. "Who would have thought our retirement career would be professional fraud victims?" Harold laughed, a genuine laugh that still surprised them both whenever it emerged. "Not the golden years we planned." "No," Denise agreed. looking out at the darkening sky where the first stars were becoming visible. But still ours. If this story stayed with you, you're not alone. Too many retirees are walking into the next chapter of life carrying silent regrets, unexpected losses, or wounds they never thought they'd face. At Goldprint, we believe those stories deserve to be told, not just because they warn, but because they heal. If you've lived something similar, if you've been misled, hurt, or had to start over when you thought the hard part was behind you, share your story in the comments. And if you want to keep hearing the real, unfiltered stories of retirement, not just the brochures, but the truth, subscribe to Goldprint. You never know whose life your story might change.